Good afternoon. My name is Clay Broughton. Today I will be presenting you a persuasive belief speech. Today's topic is the war in Iraq, why I believe it was justified in 2003, and why it continues to be very important to the national security of the United States today. In 2003, intelligence sources from across the world had indicated to the United States and other nations that Iraq did possess weapons of mass destruction and intended to use them in very short order. Iraq at that point was under Resolution 1441 by the United Nations to not only provide for a complete accounting of their weapons, but to not possess any at all, i.e. Iraq could not possess weapons and they had to prove that. And that ended up being a very big sticking point with the United States. Iraq was never able to do that, and because of that, the United States led a coalition of nations to invade Iraq and to topple the Saddam Hussein regime for good. I believe that was the right move in 2003, and it continues to be the right move today. As a result, I think Iraq and the world will thrive. My reasonings for this are pretty simple. I think the leadership in Iraq proved to be dangerous, and they proved that over a systematic number of events over a number of years. Saddam had killed millions of people going back to the early 1980s when he had invaded Iran. That was a very bloody war in which millions of people on both sides died, and during which Saddam deployed weapons of mass destruction against the Iranians, mostly in the form of lethal gas. Saddam didn't stop there. He also deployed lethal gas against his own people, primarily the Kurds. And in addition to these international wars, Saddam, in a way, justified war on his own people. Thousands and thousands of people in his own nation were brutally murdered. His sons were known to randomly murder people on the streets of Baghdad and to rape hundreds of women. This was something that had gone on for years and probably would not have ended. Saddam was a destabilizing force in the region as well. He had invaded Iran and Kuwait in less than a decade. During the war against Kuwait, Saddam was a destabilizing force in addition to this because of his actions against Israel. Israel was not even engaged in operations against Iraq, but was attacked by Scud missiles, as shown in Larry Schweikart's book, America's Victories. Israel wasn't involved and was attacked anyway. That was another reason why Saddam was such a destabilizing force in the region. He was trying to provoke Israel because he knew if he did that, he would get the alliances of all the other Arab nations against Israel, and most likely simply more death would have resulted. In addition to that, he was a destabilizing force against the ecology, the environment of the Middle East and the entire world. When defeat was looming in 1991, Saddam decided to light countless oil wells in Kuwait on fire, which hurt the Kuwaiti economy, as you can imagine, and also did a ton of damage to the environment. Another point I need to make is that Iraq couldn't be trusted. They continued to threaten the world by disobeying United Nations regulations. UN Resolution 1441, which I've already referenced, Iraq had to prove it didn't have weapons of mass destruction. It never did that. Hans Blix with the United Nations repeatedly said that Iraq would evade or hinder these inspections any chance they got, and they did this for over a decade. Other resolutions by the United Nations were flat out ignored, like reparations to the Kuwaitis. It is important to note that WMDs were never found, but other things were. Sarin gas, albeit not in weapons-grade form, was discovered in Iraq following the 2003 invasion, as were mobile labs with blueprints to create these type of weapons. Missiles that went against United Nations regulations of 150 kilometers in range were also discovered. CIA.gov is a website I discovered some pretty interesting information on. The Jenin project, this was a project by the Iraqis to develop weapons and missiles that exceeded 6 times the limit that was laid down by the United Nations regulations. Saddam continued to use his military in an aggressive way with the use of no-fly zones. These were regulations that he largely ignored in the northern part of Iraq and southern part. The Kurds continue to be persecuted, and the oil for food program was abused. CIA.gov also revealed an interesting statistic of $70 billion raised, I believe, between 97 and 02. $10 billion was illegally obtained and illegally funneled into weapons programs. The invasion of Iraq was a good thing in 2003. It remains a good thing today because of three main factors: the domestic potential, the strategic potential, and the diplomatic potential. Democracy can unify Iraq. It will take a couple of generations, but I believe it will unify that nation and make it more viable. Iraq is now a potential ally to the United States in a region that can be difficult to find allies for the U.S. Strategically, though, and this is key to understand, Iraq is key to two missions. I think Lieutenant General Mecca Enerny, in his 2003 book Endgame, really describes this well. The first mission that has to be described is the mission to bolster the more moderate Islamic nations that are already the United States allies. Turkey, Kuwait, and Jordan are these nations primarily. Another mission that is integral is the ability to project power on the Islamic fundamentalist nations in the region. Three of those include Jordan, Syria, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Iraq borders all six of these nations. Because of that, it is the perfect staging ground to accomplish two missions, both those missions, which are very, very important. In conclusion, Iraq was a danger in the past, it was a danger in the present, and it would have continued to be a danger in the future. By 2003, Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi regime had over a decade's history worth of complete disobedience of United Nations regulations. And after September 11th, the United States simply couldn't afford to make assumptions with regimes of this type. By invading Iraq, the United States ensured that this problem would not be passed to another generation of Americans. Indeed, it would be taken care of right now. Iraq would not be left in the hands of a regime that would destabilize the world and kill its own citizens. It would be a very important ally in the future.